Pittsburgh Steelers fans, it is time for another edition of the Curtain Call podcast. My name is Michael Beck, deputy editor of BehindTheSteelCurtain.com, bringing it to you as always with one Mr. Geoffrey Benedict. Geoffrey, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing really good, Michael. Excited to be talking about the draft again.
Yeah, as always, we've been doing that a lot, but like we've been saying, we always have a special guest on, and the penultimate show before the draft, we have a special guest from the Columbus Dispatch, Joey Kaufman. Joey, how are you?
I'm doing well, guys. How are you?
Hanging in there, enjoying I guess it's a snowy day in Pittsburgh. How was that for you, Geoffrey, before we get into that?
Yeah, actually, my younger brother-in-law flew in from Texas wearing flip-flops and shorts and got off and was getting snowed on. We were like, dude, you're from Pittsburgh. You should know. You should know what you're getting into.
Oh, that's wonderful. But to get back on track of the show, Ohio State prospects. I guess the big news of the day coming out, Justin Fields was his diagnosis of epilepsy kind of came to the forefront today. Joey, I'm kind of curious if that's something that has been known around Ohio State, or if that's news for everyone.
That, I think, for most people who have covered Ohio State the last couple of years, that revelation came out of left field a little bit. We hadn't really heard much rumblings about it. Justin Fields had never come off the field really at Ohio State throughout his career and didn't miss games, didn't pop up as really an issue. But, I mean, I guess it seems more like an aspect of draft season where maybe somebody's hoping that Justin Fields falls and a team leaks that out. But it hadn't come up around Ohio State. But, I mean, it's a totally different deal. I mean, if you're hanging around Ohio State, they're not really eager to leak to Penn State that Justin Fields has epilepsy 3 days before kickoff. So it's a little bit of a different game in that respect.
Go ahead, Michael.
Okay. Continuing on with the Justin Fields stuff, throughout these last couple of weeks, it seems like Fields' stock has slipped a little bit. Do you think that has anything to do with anything in particular, really? He went from being the solid quarterback number 2 of the draft to kind of falling somewhere in the 3 to 5 range. Is there really any explanation?
The whole Justin Fields draft saga, to me, in this whole pre-draft cycle, has been a little odd, because I think if you were to talk to me a year ago and even going into the last season, it seemed like there was a thought that maybe Justin Fields could challenge Trevor Lawrence for that number 1 spot, because Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields grew up together outside of Atlanta. They were in the same recruiting class in 2018, and they'd always kind of been, Trevor Lawrence was caught on 1A, Justin Fields was always 1B, and this was another shot for them to compete for the same thing. And you thought maybe Justin could really push him for the number 1 spot. And it didn't quite happen, I think, partly due to the effect that the Big Ten only played a handful of games. And in 2 of those games that Justin Fields played, they played 6 regular season games. He struggled against Indiana and Northwestern and didn't maybe have a full body of work to really evaluate. But then he still finished really strong. If you go back to that Sugar Bowl game where he throws 6 touchdowns, takes a huge shot to the ribs, and you think maybe he has to come out of the game. He misses all but 1 play. So it seems like pre-COVID, there was momentum for him to challenge for the number 1 spot. And then this whole funky, truncated college football season happens. And, okay, maybe there's some clear separation with him and Trevor Lawrence. But you think that Justin Fields is a pretty good consolation prize for the next team who takes a quarterback, and that doesn't happen. So it's really gone in, I think, maybe a direction that a lot of people around Columbus, Ohio, didn't really expect it to go, because 12 months ago we thought he'd maybe have a chance to go number 1 overall, and or at least have it more of a sort of a pre-draft intrigue to some degree. And now it seems to be, will he for sure go in the top 3, the top 5, or the top 10?
Yeah, there are times, especially on film, where you see plays from Justin Fields where I'm like, he could definitely end up being the best quarterback in this draft, and end up being one of those guys that you're like, wow, how could they take him 3rd? How could he be the 3rd quarterback taken? He's better than Trevor Lawrence in the end. But the question with him is, what's his floor? Like, are you guaranteed to get a starting quarterback in the NFL out of Justin Fields, or is this a guy where, you have that ceiling where he has times where you're like, this guy could be a Hall of Famer. Like, he has that kind of level of talent. But there's also times you're questioning, like, what's his consistent level of play? Where if the NFL career doesn't go great for him, if it doesn't go towards the high end, where does he end up? What kind of quarterback do you think you're guaranteed at least to get with a Justin Fields?
It's a fair question. I do think the ceiling is really high because he's a quarterback who ran a 4.4 and throws the ball, got a great arm, and I think he does what the NFL wants nowadays from quarterbacks, being able to create outside the pocket, hold on, and make some big plays. And I think he really brings that to the table. But the floor is a little bit of a concern, or I don't want to say a concern, but coming out, I think probably if you were to say there's a knock on him, he doesn't have this extensive college starting experience. He started 14 games at Ohio State in 2019, and then he started 8 last year. So he has 22 games in really a year and a half of college football, which is obviously not as much as Trevor Lawrence, who started 3 full seasons at Clemson and had a longer 2020 season. So I think that to me is maybe if there's a concern or you want to pick something out, or maybe just look at his whole time at Ohio State and at Georgia. He doesn't really maybe have the starting experience, and I think if you put him in a rough situation from day one, it becomes harder on him. And I think he's a very different player than Dwayne Haskins. I don't want to make that comparison at all, but Haskins only had 1 year of starting experience when he left Ohio State. They do a lot of different things. Fields is much more of a runner than Haskins is. Haskins do a lot of passes behind the line of scrimmage. Fields push the ball downfield a lot more, but neither of them coming out had this extensive 2-3 full seasons of a body of work.
One of the things we've seen in this kind of pro day phase, and one of the stories, especially for Steelers fans who saw a lot during Ohio State's pro day, and I think the best way to put it is the bromance between Mike Tomlin and Justin Fields. It seemed like over that couple-hour stretch, there's videos leaking about Mike Tomlin saying, "Oh, you're the guy we came to see," and then the long conversation after the workout was over. Have you seen teams kind of crush over a prospect like that, or is this something that you kind of see in a usual pro day type phase?
I haven't seen that a ton, but to be honest, I probably don't follow the draft cycle as closely from that perspective in terms of how much the teams are going to bat their eyelashes at a certain prospect. So I don't know. It's part of the I guess the game. Sometimes I don't know. It's a fair question, but I can't say I've probably followed it closely from that perspective.
To address something the live chat is bringing up here quite a bit, Ohio State doesn't have the greatest record of quarterbacks when those quarterbacks enter the NFL. And really, outside of Alex Smith, Urban Meyer doesn't either. With the guys he's recruited, the whole scheme, the whole system, and the school history kind of shies people away from Ohio State quarterbacks. Is there something about Justin Fields that makes you think this is the guy that can really break that and kind of be the quarterback from Ohio State that went to the NFL and was a star?
I think he can, because he's a different type of quarterback than Ohio State has typically recruited. I think if you look at maybe the BCS era, so they've had Jim Tressel and they've had Urban Meyer. A lot of the quarterbacks that they recruited were not bona fide Elite 11 type of quarterbacks where you would look at them as a high school junior, and they've gone through every quarterback pageant, and they're 6'4" with a strong arm that screams NFL guy. And Jim Tressel's whole mantra at Ohio State was to limit turnovers, have more of a game manager at quarterback. And then the type of quarterback that Urban Meyer typically recruited was more of a dual threat guy who could run the ball maybe 20 times a game. And in 2017, coming off of a playoff loss to Clemson in 2016, where they were blank 31-0 in the Fiesta Bowl in the college football playoff semifinal game, Urban Meyer brings in Ryan Day really to expand their passing game that had been an issue that had been nagging throughout Urban's tenure at Ohio State. and you bring in Ryan Day from the NFL, and they start recruiting a different type of quarterback. And Day recruited Fields out of the transfer portal. He's started to recruit typically more pro-style passers, somebody with a big arm. They brought in C.J. Stroud and Jack Miller in their 2020 recruiting class. They brought in Kyle McCord in the 2021 class. All these guys went through the Elite 11 premier quarterback competition camp and coming out of high school. So I think they've started to change in terms of the type of quarterback they've recruited. Kind of maybe the one exception of the last 15 years was Terrell Pryor from actually Western Pennsylvania, your guys' neck of the woods. And that didn't quite pan out in the NFL for a whole host of reasons we could probably wouldn't have enough time to get into. But generally, I think it's been the reason why Ohio State hasn't produced the NFL type of quarterbacks over the last 20 years is because the offense they've run in college hasn't really mirrored what you'd want an NFL quarterback to do. I think Fields will be a little more of a litmus test for the offense that Ryan Day does at Ohio State and how it translates into the NFL.
I think the Pittsburgh Steelers have a really good opportunity here to select a number of Ohio State prospects in this upcoming draft. So I do want to transition specifically Trey Sermon because this team is in a phase where they need a running back and potentially an every down kind of guy. So my question to you, Joey, is do you see Trey Sermon as a back that can take every single snap on the field? Is he a three-down guy?
He's a really versatile guy, and I think he probably does a couple things that would help you out if you're looking for somebody to, I guess, get a lot of carries or just be on the field a lot. I think for one, he can block. I think he's not a guy who's going to have a breakaway speed as a running back, but he's a guy who has a good wiggle and good able to, I think, agility and cut well. I think he can catch the ball out of the backfield really well, which makes him an option on third down. I don't think people saw that a ton this last year at Ohio State because of just a smaller schedule. And he transferred in during the offseason, and it was shortened by COVID and all that. But I think ideally Ohio State would have worked him into their passing game a little more. But he played some receiver back in high school. So I think he just gives you a lot of different options out of a running back. He's not going to be a guy who's gonna have the best 40 time or have a great kind of end-to-end speed, breakaway speed from guys. But he's a bigger back, so he can handle the workload. I mean, in the Big Ten championship game for Ohio State, he carried them to that win and just kind of the workload he was able to handle in the second half when Justin Fields injured his hand and couldn't really throw the ball all that well. So he can do a lot of different things and really is a guy who can be on the field for a lot of different situations.
Did Ohio State use him in any positions other than running back? Did they ever flex him out in like the slot? Did he ever use like a H-back role? Was there any usage of that, or did he do all of his work even as a receiver out of the backfield as a running back?
It was pretty much straight out of the backfield. Ryan Day, kind of what I was hitting at, talked about it after the pro day. He said that if they had more of a standard, typical offseason, they might have had a chance to be more creative with how they lined him up. So they seem to think he might have the skill set to do some of those things. But I think if you were to just plug in his tape from last year, you wouldn't really see a ton of evidence. But they seem to think he could maybe project that way out.
One of the issues with the Steelers tailback group right now, I'd say as a whole, is a lack of running back vision. Is Sermon someone that can survey the field and actually make the right choice and the right cuts when the ball's in his hands?
I think that's his best quality, honestly, as a runner, is just the way he moves in that second level of a defense. And if you watch that Big Ten title game, he's maybe surrounded by guys and he's able to cut one direction. I remember he was coming off a knee injury earlier in the year and he didn't really impress you with his speed, but I think where he makes his money as a runner is the way he's able to see a defender and move in a fluid way to get around guys rather than just having – he's not going to outrun you necessarily, but he's going to be able to maybe.
Is he more of an inside runner? Does he do well taking the ball outside, breaking outside runs, or is he more a guy it's an inside out, head up the middle, like you said, weave through traffic and break runs that way?
He seemed to bounce more outside and then at the second level weave through traffic more. But instinctively, that's what Ohio State, or it's instinctively what he did, and kind of how Ohio State had a lot of design stuff for him to bounce outside.
Geoffrey, do you have any more questions on Sermon, or can we move on to the next guy? Shaking your head. So the Steelers, another big spot of need for them is the center spot. Of course, Josh Myers is coming out of the Ohio State program this year. Is he a guy that can start right away, or is he someone that needs a couple weeks to marinate before he can take over a starting role at the next level?
He probably has the size to start right away. I mean, he's 6'5". He's really big, and I think you're not going to see him needing to, I don't think, really change his body at all. And he's got good athleticism. So I think he'll have a chance to start right away. Sure, I don't see why he would need to. He was a 4-year guy. That helps. He started for 2 years at Ohio State. He's I think a pretty smart guy too. When he came to Ohio State, he came from a high school which in southwest Ohio, which runs a wing T offense, and so the blocking scheme that he did in high school was totally different than when he came to Ohio State and was running sort of your typical pro spread. So I think that will help him well. It shows that he's able to kind of adapt from coming to high school to college pretty quickly. So I think he's physically he's there. He's what you want. I think he's smart enough to be able to handle that transition and picking up a new scheme.
Okay, so the Steelers have a long history of drafting big-time athletes at center, and they like to pull their centers out and get them out in space. Josh Myers has the athletic profile to do that, but was he asked to do that at Ohio State? Did Ohio State run him a lot in outside zone kind of plays? Did they have him pull it all? Is that something he's familiar with at Ohio State?
They had him pull a little bit. They pulled their guard Wyatt Davis a lot more than they did Josh Myers, but he did some of that. He did it. I mean, he did it a lot in high school, just with the wing tee and the way they moved him outside a lot. So he does have some experience doing that in college, not as much as he had in high school.
One of the things that I try to find with traits when it comes to centers is someone that can really kind of lead that group. Someone, of course, that spot's calling out a lot of the blocking schemes. Is Myers someone that was viewed as a leader along that offensive line?
As a leader in terms of like locker room guy, or in terms of
locker room guy, and I would say, yeah, and that in that group in general and within the locker room.
Typically, they would kind of gather in a huddle before the game, and Josh Myers would be either he or Wyatt Davis would be typically one of the guys addressing the entire team during pregame warm up. So he was always I think a vocal guy from that perspective, and so I think that would be a plus for whoever gets him.
Speaking of Wyatt Davis, the Steelers don't really have a need for a guard right now. But Wyatt Davis reminds me a lot of the guys Steelers drafted last year with Kevin Dotson. He's a real people mover. Wyatt, he is, that kind of run blocking guard you really want to have. But does he have any position flexibility, or is he a guy who's going to probably fall in the draft simply because you have to play him at guard? He's just a guard.
I think that does hurt him a little bit. I think he doesn't have this track record of where he played a bunch of tackle in high school. He ended up playing a lot of guard in high school because he came from St. John Bosco in California, which produces a ton of NFL guys. So they already had like a Division I bound tackle when he was there. And at Ohio State, he was strictly a guard. He didn't really rotate at center or tackle at all. I don't know if he could or couldn't play that position. He's really athletic and
Uh-oh.
And or he's not as tall if you want to move him out to tackle. I mean, he's smaller than Josh Myers at 6'4". So I think he
getting a little bit of freezing here. I'm not sure if Joey's finished his answer there. But before he gets back, Geoffrey, I'll pose to you. Do you think Josh Myers is the kind of guy that could step in as the Steelers center? And there we go. You're back. Sorry, you froze a little bit on us.
I'm sorry, I froze.
Oh, it's all good. You were just midway through that question on Wyatt Davis. Kind of lost you when he played a bunch of guard in high school.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the other thing too, I was just going to add was the fact that he's 6'4". He's not really, I don't think, has the size that you would want to push out the tackle where you're 6'5", 6'6". So I think that he's a little pigeonholed at that guard spot.
Gotcha. Now, when it comes to comparing both the guys we're just talking about, being Josh Myers and Wyatt Davis, who would you say is the better of that duo?
I don't know if I could pick one between those two. They always felt really linked. They started the same time together at Ohio State. They both came on in 2019. They were both in the same recruiting class, so they waited 2 years to start. So they feel very interchangeable to me. I think it more depends if center is a position for need. I think maybe you go out and get Josh Myers. I think if guard your position need, maybe you go out and get Wyatt Davis. I would probably give Josh Myers a slight edge just because he's played center, and I think he could probably slide into guard a little more seamlessly. And so I think he gives you a little more positional flexibility than Wyatt Davis has. But in terms of what they do well and being able to pull and run block, I think they're both pretty similar players overall.
How polished would you say Myers and Davis are as pass blockers?
That was always a little bit of I won't say concern, but I guess a much discussed issue at Ohio State, because if you look at Ohio State's sack rate the last 2 years, when Justin Fields was a starter, it was fairly low in Football Outsiders metrics, and there was one side of that coin which would say that Ohio State's offensive line is not a great pass blocking offensive line, or at least as good as they should be. The other side of the coin of that was Justin Fields tended to hold the ball for a longer period of time, which sometimes was good because he would hold the ball on longer and find a receiver downfield and throw the ball very far and make a big play. But sometimes it would lead to a sack, which would then drop you down in that metric. But so that's kind of the little bit of the tug of war there. So I think that they make their bones more of as run blockers than pass blockers. But I mean, it's not like you saw a ton of pressure going up the middle where people were sacking Justin Fields very often either.
Transitioning over to the defensive side of the football, I want to ask you about Shaun Wade, the corner. Is he someone that is strictly an outside guy, or could he play more of a physical kind of slot type role?
His best year was 2019 when he played slot, and there was thought that if he had come out after that season, which they had Damon Arnett and Jeff Okudah, the outside corners, and those guys were 2 first-round picks, and Shaun Wade was the slot corner, and they thought maybe he could even go into the back end of the first round if he had come out. But he wanted to come back and play for a national title, and he also wanted to play outside corner, which he hadn't done in Ohio State. And on paper, he had a good last year. He was named an All-American and was the Big Ten Defensive Back of the Year. But I think a lot of people could turn on the tape and you watch some games early in the year against Penn State and Rutgers where he was giving up touchdowns and he was picked on a little bit in the college football playoff. So his year at outside corner did not go as well as he hoped, and there were maybe some reasons for that contributed to that. His agent said he had a turf toe injury last fall, which is why his pro day got delayed. So he didn't have really the type of year you wanted to see from him as an outside corner. It seems like the prevailing thought is he's going to have to move back inside and play that spot. So that'll be, I think, where he ends up being more likely is inside than outside, just because of how 2020 transpired. And maybe he could play outside. And he's 6'1". He has the size to do it, which is why he wanted to move back there and why Ohio State wanted him to play outside corner last year. And he put up some good testing numbers at his pro day last week. But I wonder if a team will give him a shot there, or they'll stick him inside at nickel, or maybe even movement to safety, because he played a little bit of there earlier in his Ohio State career as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what traits does he bring? Because I've seen him. I've seen him projected as a player who can play safety. What kind of traits does he bring to the safety position?
was always a good tackler and always an athletic guy.
Oh, we lost him again.
Am I there still, or you guys?
Yeah, there you are.
There you are. Sorry, we lost you right as you started that answer.
I can't. I guess I'll just go. I mean, I think the thing that Shaun Wade brings, I guess, a lot of it is tackling. I think he's always a good tackler in space. I think where he tended to struggle the most last year was some one-on-one situations, and where he didn't get a lot of help, and he was over eager to make an interception and really got caught out of place. So I think there's some coverage spots he got exposed. But I think he's a good athlete. I think if you were to have him, he's rangy, but I think sort of the ball skills that you would expect from an outside corner, I don't think it's where he is best at.
We are getting close to the 30-minute mark, so I'm going to bounce between a couple prospects here. Could you kind of compare Baron Browning and Pete Werner, and who projects to be the better inside linebacker at the next level?
I think Pete Werner certainly played it more. And you look at his track record at Ohio State. I mean, he was such a mainstay in the middle of that defense, and just you turn on the tape every time you watch Pete Werner was around the football. And he was always around kind of cleaning up stuff around the line of scrimmage. So he has more experience, I think, playing on the inside than Browning does. Browning's best trait always at Ohio State, it seemed like, and you wonder sometimes why they didn't move him more, is he really was promising as an edge rusher and somebody you could maybe, even if you're going to be in a 3-4 defense and you want sort of that stand-up edge rusher, I think he really has a great burst off the line of scrimmage. He's really long. He can get in passing lanes, bat down balls, get after a quarterback. So that to me has always been where maybe he should have played more in college, and I think I could see him fitting well in that sort of scheme in the NFL.
Pete Werner is actually a guy I really like for the Steelers. How did he do taking on blockers and also blitzing? Because the Steelers are, if you're pairing a guy with a Devin Bush, you want someone who can be a little more physical and be a little more aggressive with blitzing. How did he do in those roles?
They didn't have him blitz a ton at Ohio State, but I mean, he was always kind of, I think, able to go up against bigger guys. He was always impressive to me in that he was able to, I think, have enough speed to get outside, and you'd see plays bounce outside, and he would flow there. And if there was stuff near the line of scrimmage and in the trenches, and you had to be ugly and go up against a bigger blocker, he was able to do that. So he always seemed like a classic linebacker to me, where you could count on him to do a bunch of different stuff.
I'm not sure if I'm going to say this right, but Tommy Togai, is he like a nose tackle type that projects well to be an interior run stuffer in this next level?
Yeah, it's Tommy Togai. He started only 1 year at Ohio State, known as for having really big strong man is kind of always the word at Ohio State. He was always considered the strongest guy on the team. Going into his pro day at Ohio State, he was trying to break the combine record for bench presses at 50. He got over 40, didn't quite get to 50, but he's a slacker. He's more than I could do. I could say that much. But he only had 1 year of a starting experience, and you thought maybe he would come back for another year at Ohio State. And he was a junior last year, and you thought because that was a shorter season, he'll come back for a senior year and really add to his seasoning, really improve his stock. And he came out early, and that surprised a lot of people. But he had a pretty good year. I think just doesn't have a long track record, but I think because of his strength, he's got a lot of upside.
Okay, I got one more quick one for you before we let you go. Luke Farrell, the tight end, is he someone? His kind of rankings a little all over the board in like those day 3 picks. Is Farrell kind of what kind of tight end does he play?
Really good blocking tight end. Ohio State's offensive coordinator, Kevin Wilson, called him the best blocking tight end in the class. And Ohio State didn't throw to him a ton, but in the last 2 years under Ryan Day, they ran a lot of 12 personnel, put 2 tight ends on the field with him and Jeremy Rucker. And Ohio State has a lot of wide receivers. They could have certainly played more receivers and just used 1 tight end and kept Luke Farrell on the sidelines, but they thought highly of him enough to keep him on the field as much as they did, which I think says something about kind of what he brought to that offense. So to me, he would be a really intriguing day 3 option just because of how much they liked his blocking. And they didn't throw to him a ton, but when they did, he was able to catch the ball. And you're not going to, I don't think, draft him because of his pass catching ability per se, but he's just a versatile guy. I think just a really solid blocker, or at least gives you somewhat of a threat in the passing game.
I'm going to let Thaddeus Kennedy get the last words in here. He asked, is Mike Tomczak the best quarterback to ever play in the NFL coming out of Ohio State?
He might be, which is not being the best quarterback in the NFL to come out of Ohio State is all that impressive. But I mean, I think he might have the most wins or the best record of an Ohio State quarterback. You have to fact check me on that one, but I think it was something like that, where he had at least played the longest and won the most games. But I mean, it's really slim pickings if you're sorting through that category.
Hopefully, Justin Fields can unseat him. Before you go, is there anything you want to plug, Joey?
Sure. Just if you want to read more about the Ohio State prospects in this draft, visit BuckeyeExtra.com, which is the Columbus Dispatch's website for all Ohio State football coverage.
Awesome. Joey Kaufman, thank you so much for your time.
Hey, thank you, Michael, and thank you, Geoffrey.
Thanks.
All right, so everyone that is listening on YouTube and Facebook right now, just hang tight. We'll jump into the second half of our podcast momentarily. If you are listening on any streaming service, click over to part 2, and we will be back with some Steelers news and some more draft talk. So we'll be right back. We are back with the second half of the Curtain Call podcast. Once again, my name is Michael Beck, joined as always by Geoffrey Benedict in snowy Pittsburgh. Geoffrey, how are you?
Doing good still, Mike. I'm actually, this year, I'm not getting tired of draft talk. Normally by this point, I'm absolutely sick of it, but I'm enjoying it this year.
You know what? I have a theory on this. I think last year it was easy to kind of get sick of because the Steelers didn't have a first-round pick, and it took a little bit of the fun away. If I'm being honest, that's how I felt. But this year, the Steelers could genuinely go in like 10 different directions. Oh, even more than that. You could list 30 names, and I'd be like, I don't know who of these guys did pick. Are you feeling the same thing?
Oh, yeah. Give an example of that in our Slack chat. Shannon White and I were talking. We were having a discussion about offensive linemen, and I was talking about like Creed Humphrey and his mobility and outside zone play and his ability to pull. And then we were talking about, like, are the Steelers even going to go that way? Could they go more with, like, straight power guys? And you look at, like, the Ohio State guys, and you're like, we could do an inside-based, more power running game, pick up a Trey Sermon, pick up their center, Josh Myers, and just be more of that bully interior running team. Or we could go completely different direction and get like a Travis Etienne and a Creed Humphreys and be outside. Like, there's so much we don't know that even like looking at offensive line and running back, you're like, we could go in completely different directions. And that's why I think this draft is so exciting, is who the Steelers do pick is going to tell so much about what this team is going to be doing in the future.
Yeah, it really is. I think that's another one of those exciting things. As we get closer to the draft, you look at Matt Canada's system and you think to yourself, he could run like a ton of different things here. We don't really know what the system is exactly. And I think a lot of those answers will be questioned after the second day of the NFL draft. Are you feeling the same thing?
Yeah. Yeah, I really think we're going to see where Matt Canada wants this offense to go.
And genuinely, as we sit here right now, it could be any of the top running backs, any of the top offensive linemen. Heck, they might go some quarterback we never heard of and just blow all our minds. I have no idea. There is no insight on what the Steelers could be doing a week tomorrow, which is crazy to think of. The draft is almost upon us. But the Steelers news of the week, Mike Tomlin got a 3-year contract extension. What were your original thoughts the second you read that?
I was surprised it was 3 years. I know they typically do stuff, but they've Tomlin and Colbert have been kind of seeming more like they're not really committed. Like Colbert wants to do it year by year. Tom was doing shorter extensions, and the talk was, maybe these guys are going to be done. Maybe they're going to be done together in a few years. But for a 3-year deal for Mike Tomlin, to me, that is a big future commit from the Steelers and coaching contract terms. And I think, to me, that says that they don't want Mike Tomlin just until Ben retires, that Mike Tomlin is the guy going forward. And it doesn't just say that from the Steelers side. It says Mike Tomlin, to me, wants to be that guy. And I think, to me, this says they're sending a signal that this relationship is nowhere near the end.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I've kind of hypothesized is the Steelers are kind of going through this transition. And if Mike Tomlin did want to eventually move on from this NFL head coaching journey, by extending his time past when Ben Roethlisberger's career, he puts a bow on his career, really, by staying a couple years in the transition period, it would also set up the next head coach for a little bit more success earlier on. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Steelers have been so successful over the last 60 years of having just so few coaches, is because when the next guy comes in, there's still a pretty good foundation in place when they take the job over. And I think Mike Tomlin might, if he's the guy that's sitting through the transition before he turns over the keys, I think that might be something that just benefits the next guy. Is that something you'd agree with?
Yeah, only I'm going to put a caveat on that. Mike Tomlin is 49 years old.
This is true.
I could see him coaching into his 60s with the Steelers. I think his tenure could be much more Chuck Noll and longer even than, it'd be, what was Chuck Noll, 22, 23 seasons?
69
to 91.
Yeah.
22. However many that is, math geniuses, 22 or 23.
Nerds.
Nerds. Sorry about that.
No, you're not. I'm not.
Not at all. So I could honestly see Mike Tomlin breaking that number. I could see him coaching for even longer than Chuck Noll did, simply because Tomlin is the guy who always talks about loving the process, and he's a guy who does love the process of football. He gets into the day-to-day stuff, and he always says, if you don't love the day-to-day work of this, then you don't belong here. He's that guy, and I could see him being a real lifer as a head coach. And the way the Pittsburgh Steelers operate, that means he could be here. We could be talking about the Steelers have had 3 coaches in 80 years by the time he's done.
That's a crazy thought to think of, Mike Tomlin, head coach 2050. But Coach Belichick just turned 69. Nice. A couple days ago. So who knows? Mike Tomlin could be that guy too. But why are people so mad about this extension?
Okay? People are mad because there are people who don't like Mike Tomlin, and they are consistently frustrated that the Steelers don't care. That the Steelers love Mike Tomlin, that the Rooneys like him, that all the players that play for him love Mike Tomlin, that players that play against Mike Tomlin love Mike Tomlin, and that if he left the Steelers, he would be the top coaching prospect in the NFL, and there would be a bidding war for him because he's not even 50 years old. He would be and players love him, and he has nothing but success. He has a better record with backup quarterbacks than Bill Belichick does. Wrap your head around that. He has done, not only does he not have a losing season, every backup quarterback that has started for Mike Tomlin has at least a 500 record. including Devlin Hodges, right? And Byron Leftwich and Dennis Dixon and Michael Vick. They all win more than they lose when they play for Mike Tomlin. Landry Jones has a winning record with Mike Tomlin. Like, what team wouldn't take him as a coach? So there's people that are angry about this because they don't like Mike Tomlin. And the rest of the world is like, we don't care. Like, they have their own little, like, Fire Tomlin crowd. And outside of that, Mike Tomlin is a great football coach. Sorry.
Yeah, the way I see it, if Mike Tomlin were to be fired by the Pittsburgh Steelers, it wouldn't be the end of the day before he had another head coaching job somewhere else. Like, genuinely, I think that's how fast it would go. There would be no reason for an interview process to just be like, oh, Tomlin's available? Well, we have Kyle Shanahan, but, like, seriously, like I couldn't name you 28 teams that wouldn't be putting a phone call in. And, I think that's... Go ahead.
As much fuss as teams made over Urban Meyer, if the Steelers had fired Mike Tomlin, Urban Meyer would have been the second best coach on the coaching market. He would have been the second hottest coaching commodity. And yeah, people, you can talk about, when was the last time they won in the playoffs? You know what? Teams do that. That freaking happens. Tom Brady won 7. I pointed this out in an earlier conversation today, but in the 15 seasons, Tom Brady did not have Wes Welker or Randy Moss on his team. He won 7 Super Bowls. In the seasons he had those guys, he didn't. Teams lose games. What has Sean Payton done in New Orleans with Drew Brees? What has Aaron Rodgers done in Green Bay? Nobody in this era has done much. They just haven't. Peyton Manning won 1 Super Bowl with the Colts. He went to a second team and ended up winning another one, but he won 1 Super Bowl with the Colts. They had all that time together. They won 1 Super Bowl. Tomlin's won 1 Super Bowl with Ben Roethlisberger. That's normally what you get.
Yeah, and it's one of the more frustrating things, I'd say, on social media the last couple of days. There's some of these takes about Mike Tomlin, but genuinely, how long do you think Mike Tomlin will continue to do this for?
To coach?
Yeah, to be the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers.
10 years.
10 more years?
I think he's got 10 more in him.
I could see him wanting to go to be the longest tenured guy in Steelers history. I think those kind of those numbers mean stuff to people. I could see that making sense for Mike Tomlin. But before we move on to other stuff, do you think Mike Tomlin, as we sit here today, is already the greatest minority head coach in the history of the NFL?
I don't know.
I
don't. You know what? I would rank him right now.
It'd be between him and Tony Dungy, I'd say.
Ooh. Okay, if we're just matching those two up. Wow. Yeah, I'd take Tomlin.
I think that there's a
over
first
Tony Dungy. And Dungy's a fantastic head coach. So yeah, I would take. I think I'd take Tomlin over Dungy. Tomlin is second to Bill Belichick in his coaching tenure. In the years he's been a head coach, the only coach better than him is Bill Belichick, and that's it. And you got to put a question mark on that because we got to see Bill Belichick do anything remotely good without Tom Brady, other than be like, wow, look how smart he is. Oh, they lost again. Show me Bill Belichick being a Super Bowl contender without Tom Brady, and then I'll put him back up on that pedestal and say Tomlin's nowhere close to him. But I think Tomlin's honestly closer to Belichick than people want to give him credit for.
Yeah, and I can totally agree with that. I think this is a pretty big year for Bill Belichick coming up. If the Patriots flop with all their signings, and I think by all means they're probably going to make a play for a top 10 quarterback, and all the guys that opted out last year coming back. If the Patriots flop, all of a sudden people are going to be like, oh, did Brady make Belichick? And I think that it's reasonable conversation to have it if he flops again with this pretty solid roster. So something to watch for. But moving away from the Mike Tomlin stuff and getting a little bit back into the draft side of things, tonight is going to be the last night that we have a specialized special guest, I should say, from schools. Next week, we're going to do kind of we still will have a special guest, but to kind of cover the Steelers in general throughout the entire draft process, being the show before the draft goes on. But throughout this whole process, we've talked to a number of schools. We've talked to Alabama, we've talked to Michigan, Penn State, Pitt, which was fun, Ohio State tonight. Is there one school that really sticks out to you where you're like, you know what, the Steelers could take a number of guys out of this program?
I think Ohio State really does stand out there because I like 4 of their guys. Shaun Wade would be a great, in my opinion, replacement for Mike Hilton in that kind of a role. I think he's a natural fit. He's kind of that safety slot corner hybrid that the Steelers absolutely love. I think Pete Werner would be a fantastic pickup. His athletic profile isn't Devin Bush. But when you go past straight line speed, his agility scores, his strength, his jumps, all his measurements are in the same range as a Devin Bush, and I think he would really be a good fit for them. Then you've got Josh Myers, who, if they go to a more power style, Trey Sermon, that's another option for them. If for some reason the Steelers were to trade up for a quarterback, who's more likely for it to be than Justin Fields? This is all kind of like Ohio State has a team that really fits with what the Steelers seem to be doing, seem to be heading for. And they've got some defensive players that really look like they would fit the Steelers.
They really do. And before I lose the comment here, Kathy Forehead asks, because it is the title of the show after all, how many Ohio State Buckeyes will the Pittsburgh Steelers draft? Put a bow on it.
I can't see it being 3, but I could definitely see 2.
I can see that as well.
I see a late round pick and a mid round pick.
So this might tie into an article that I have running tomorrow morning about the Steelers. If they miss out on the top 3 running backs of this upcoming draft, could Trey Sermon be the answer at that running back spot, or is there still some questions that arise from having a second-tier running back, another one really, on this roster?
I think Sermon really would fit. He would immediately, and people would love this, he would make Benny Snell expendable, because Sermon is more of an inside runner. He's from the film I've watched and what I've seen, his big plays are those inside and outside zone plays where he cuts up and navigates traffic, and all of a sudden he's through. So if we go more of a zone blocking, if we go more of an inside-outside zone blocking scheme, Sermon could definitely be that guy. And he's not a top-end speed guy, but he's also not slow. Like he's got some quickness to him. He's not going to be late career Le'Veon Bell, where by 8 yards he's getting run down from behind by defensive linemen. The Sermon has some speed. He can break some plays.
I can definitely agree with that. I think it's going to be an interesting draft when it comes to what schools the Steelers are picking guys out of. I kind of see, especially with, I believe Kevin Colbert said a year ago or less than a year ago that they would be favoring schools that played this year. And of course, there are some schools that played more. So I think there's going to be some extra value in the Alabamas and Clemson. The Big Ten didn't play as many games, but because they're local, I could foresee guys from Penn State, Pitt, Ohio State, Michigan. I could see a lot of the picks being kind of from schools that are around the Steelers organization. Do you kind of see that too, or are they going to be sticking close to home and kind of snubbing maybe the Division II guys and guys on the West Coast and guys from the South?
I don't think the year has much to do with it. I could see them swinging. They normally do 2 from 1. You'll see like where they double up stuff and they get 3 guys from one conference and 2 of them from the same team. But no, I don't think it would be like a focus, and I don't think it would be because of COVID. I could see the SEC getting taken harder just because they played so many games compared to everyone else.
Yeah, I think that will be one factor that you'll see across pretty much the entire NFL. A lot of guys coming out of the SEC, they normally do, but it could be a more inflated number than most years. But a question here that I've asked you pretty much every other week since we started this draft process is in regards to draft clarity in the Pittsburgh Steelers. When we first started this, it was as murky as the water could be. To me, as we sit here right now, 8 days before the draft, I still feel like we're sitting in fairly murky water. Do you see any kind of direction starting to form out for the Pittsburgh Steelers, or is it still just a ton of question marks?
I don't know if I talked about this on last week's show, but I think the first round, if the first round isn't offensive line or running back, then the Steelers have painted themselves into a hole. Like they've dug themselves into a bit of a hole there because they have to address both positions. And you aren't taking someone in the fourth round and saying, that's our new number one running back, or that's our starting center by week 4. You're not doing that in the fourth round, which means you have 3 picks to fill 2 positions of need. So I think the Steelers have kind of painted themselves into a situation where they really, really have to address these positions, and they have to do it early in the draft. And that is unusual, because I'm always the guy who says the Steelers never go into the draft having those kind of needs, but they really do. This season, they really do have those needs. And I will be incredibly surprised if we don't see a center and a running back taken by the time the third round ends.
I can definitely agree with that. I foresee a lot of mock drafts coming out that pretty much go center, tackle, running back, center, tackle, some sort of order. It seems to be kind of the theme if they don't add another pick, which I know a lot of Steelers fans like to do. But building off of what you said, the Steelers typically are buttoned up before the draft happens. And once again, 8 days until the draft, at the moment of recording this podcast, could the Steelers sign anyone within this next week before they're on the clock?
Yeah, I don't think so. There's not really anyone to sign. At this point, they'll probably wait till afterwards and see what they get. And if maybe if the situation doesn't go well and you don't get a running back, maybe you do, kick the tires on an older running back around. Maybe, there are some people out there, but they're not someone you're going to sign before the draft because they're not the guy you want, right? They're not the number one guy you want. So the Steelers are going to go for it in the draft. But I could see someone after the draft as a, oops, we need something here.
When you look at the Steelers roster, though, and you take into consideration, I know Dave Schofield, I believe it was one of his old Stat Geek podcasts going back a couple weeks, the percentages that these guys play after each round goes by, it seems like the Steelers still need to sign some players to fill these holes because these draft picks won't be inserted in the lineup and won't be doing so potentially not even this upcoming year, but maybe in 2022. Could you see the Steelers make kind of a run of signings once that compensatory formula is off the table that first Monday after the draft is over?
I don't think so. They don't really have the money for that. I think you're going to see more of the pickup guys who are kind of like never got a chance from last year. We've seen some of them. We've seen some kind of reclamation project kind of signings, but they're not going to be able to. I'm trying to think of the term Dave always uses. I think it's over displacement, right? They're not going to be able to add much salary versus displacement. Where when you add someone to the 53 man, you kick them off. Compare their salaries. That's how much you added to your salary cap in reality. So I think really looking at that, they've got to stay cheap. It's got to stay cheap. Yeah, they have around $10 million, but that's your draft class and a little bit of money to get you through the season if people get hurt.
Oh, to be fair, though, I think everyone that's left in free agency is probably not getting offered much more than the veteran minimum, especially this late in the game. Money just not being available because of the COVID year. So I could still see them bringing in potentially a veteran running back. I think edge rusher or backup edge is one that I would kind of consider to be more likely if they don't draft one with their first 4 or 5 picks. I could see that happening. I think a Ryan Kerrigan might be a name. I know he's 33 and the Steelers don't typically sign older players, but if Cassius Marsh is your primary backup, you're in a serious pickle. And I think they should look into bringing in a player like that. Before we run out of time today, though, we haven't even mentioned the NFL rule changes. They became official today. Really pretty mellow, pretty vanilla in terms of basically there aren't many rule changes. Some penalties on extra points that doesn't really affect the game. Preseason doesn't have overtime now. Really the biggest ruling is the brand new jersey rules where skill players and not defensive ends, but outside linebackers and corners and safeties basically can wear 1 from 49 or the numbers that they were originally also allowed to wear. Do you like this rule? To me, I'm 24-year-old guy. I mean, I feel like this is the kind of market they're trying to appeal to. And personally, I hate it. I think it just kind of looks tacky. It looks kind of like you're going to a high school game, and I don't love it. So I'm curious to know your thoughts on this.
I actually love it. I really, really like it. I've always been a fan in any sport of really big guys with single-digit numbers. Like they just look huge, and it always cracks me up. Being a Michigan fan, Charles Woodson wearing number 2 back in the Lloyd Carr days where that number 2 kind of rotated. I love that stuff. I love the idea that like you put more value in a number. You know, I think there's a big deal. Like Alex Highsmith wearing number 56 carries so much weight for me. Like he's taken on that kind of mantle to be like, I'm going to be this guy. I'm going to,
hell yeah,
take this number and do it justice. I love that. I love all the different number things. And I really want to see, he's already said he's not going to do it, but I would love to see Joe Hayden go back to number 5. I'd love to see, Minkah Fitzpatrick take a single digit number. I'd love it. I want to see what was it? Reggie Bush,
number 5.
Number 5. Yeah. I'd love to see it. I think that would be great.
It's interesting you say that. In my opinion, if you're wearing a single digit, you better be the baddest dude on the field, because otherwise you look like a huge dork. If you rock onto the field wearing number 1 and you suck, you're getting chirped until you cry. Like you better play good if you're wearing a single digit.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons I love it is it's that move. Like when you see a pass rusher wearing like number 1, you're just like, better be that guy. Like you better be the dude. TJ Watt could rock a number 1.
Ooh. When was the last time the Steelers have issued number 1 though? Come to think of it, I think it might be like a team philosophy that they don't issue that number. I'm pretty sure it might be. I
don't know. That would be a good Dave Schofield question.
Yeah, we'll have to throw it to him.
Have him answer that on the show.
Well, previews tomorrow night. Maybe we can get him to look into it for us and report it out to the masses tomorrow.
Dave Schofield, there's your challenge.
Yeah. Outside of that, I think one last thing with the jersey number before we hang up the line here. Do you think jersey collectors should get some sort of kickback if all of a sudden all their favorite players are changing their numbers? Do you think that's fair for people that spend a lot of money? They're expensive, $150, $200, depending on what kind of quality. Is that something that you might have a problem with?
Well, I don't think you're going to see as many veterans change numbers. I don't think you're going to see many of them. I don't know if they still do it, but it used to be if you changed your number, like you had to get permission. They had to account for like jerseys that were made of yours before you got to change numbers, unless of course you change teams. So I think that's one thing. If you're a free agent signing with a new team, you can change your number because someone else has if they have a jersey with your number on it, name on it, it's from your old team. It's not accurate anyways. But I think players that are staying on teams are probably going to have to deal with that from the NFL too, to be like, well, you're changing this number. We're selling jerseys. We've got ones made sitting in the warehouse ready to sell. Where you have to do something about that. So I don't think that'll be as big of an issue. I think it'll be more rookies coming in, people changing teams as free agents, picking different numbers.
Awesome. Well, the next time you'll be seeing this duo will be the night before the draft. Man, it's kind of flown by already this offseason. So that's going to be exciting to get to. Geoffrey,
Our draft spectacular.
I like it. Maybe that's what we should name it. But I guess Brian Anthony Davis says the last call when it comes to those things. But we'll run it past him. But before we get out, is there anything you want to plug?
Yeah, I had some articles this week. I'm trying to think. I had one. We just did a Vertex on the backup defensive lineman. Focuses a lot on Carlos Davis, the young rookie, who I absolutely trashed. I did it politely, but if you read my rookie right after the draft, my review of his college film, I destroyed this poor young man and really pointed out that his college film was just full of holes. And he came in and played in week 9 and looked like a completely different player. He's gone to someone that I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do this season. So check that out. That's really it.
And to put the cherry on top, I cannot stress enough how much content we're going to be bringing to you over the next week at BehindTheSteelCurtain.com and on the podcast side. Really, there's going to be a ton of information coming at you. I know Dave Schofield is doing a quick 10-minute podcast after each and every pick. That will be available wherever you get your podcast from. So make sure you're subscribed to us on YouTube. You're following on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. And on top of that, wherever you get your podcast from, you're going to be getting a ton of information on that side strictly. So make sure you're clicking over there to give us 5 stars on your Apple Podcasts or leaving a comment, because that really does help boost the show, and you're going to get a ton of content coming your way. Before I sign out here, Wes Hickok puts $2 in the tip jar. He said Gary Anderson is the only Steeler to ever wear number 1. I'm going to have to believe you on that. I believe you're right. I think Gary Anderson at least was the last guy. Maybe we could get to Dave Schofield to confirm that on tomorrow's preview. But I'm going to believe you completely, Wes. So thank you for the $2. And as always, it's a pleasure to join you guys each and every week on these Wednesday nights. So looking forward to do it one more time before the draft, and we'll see you guys then.